Thank you very much. Hi. Yeah, so my name is Vadim Drobinin. I'll be talking about the nomadic approach to teaching iOS development, whatever that means. And before we start, I will shortly share about the path I had. I used to teach in summer informatics school in Russia for 3 years, which is like a summer camp for inspiring developers, mostly for students and children who want to learn how to develop mobile apps, how to learn algorithms and data structures, and start their path to developer's career. So it's like a proper camp where you go into the woods for 2-3 weeks. You don't have any internet, which is very convenient. If you want to, oh, perfect. If you want to learn development without getting distracted by social networks, here in the woods, the only way to get internet is to climb up the tree and actually try to get connection, which is hard to do with a laptop. And then I started to help with the organization of Coca Heads Moscow, the Moscow chapter of Coca Heads. And then I moved to St. Petersburg and organized Coca Heads St. Petersburg. And when we got folks to help us to organize it in Kazan. And now we Coca Heads Russia because we operate in 7 cities in Russia. And we have monthly events of up to 150 to 100 people every month. And then I was lucky enough to teach a 22-week course at VK University, a modern on-site university founded by Russian biggest social network, kind of like Russian Facebook, but more focused on privacy, I'd say. And for the last few years, I mostly give talks, trying to inspire people to write better code, to share knowledge more, and learn more techniques, mostly in iOS field. So in a nutshell, what this talk will be about is, first, we should share knowledge. It's very important, and sharing is always a must. Because once we gain, we have something to share as well. And then I'll try to slightly explain the title and what is so nomadic about the approach I'll be going to share with you today. And then we'll draft this paradigm of learning as traveling, and we'll find how they intersect each other and what's so similar about both learning and traveling, what they have in common. And then we'll build a roadmap and plan the trip and learn how to do it for other people, for those you want to teach. And then we will learn how to remove obstacles on the way. So that is good, but that doesn't explain why we should teach iOS in the first place. I mean, everything is fine, you have your job, you earn your money. Why do you want to raise competitors? And using that, why should we teach at all? Why should we share knowledge? So teaching is important for various reasons. And first, it's important for us, because for us it's a way to master many disciplines. Once you start to share something, you have to make sure you are learning that in the first place and you know that good enough to teach someone else. Then it's a way to meet great people, because if you share, if you teach, you get exposed to a variety of folks around and you can interact with them. And the means of interacting might be the same or might be different. You might do blog posts, you might give talks, you might record YouTube videos, but in any way, you'll definitely meet some great people around. And that whole process will constantly make you better. You'll get better at sharing your knowledge, at technical writing, because technical writing is a separate skill which is not taught well enough nowadays. And you will learn more about the field where you want to share something. And if I can emphasize only one thought from the upcoming talk, it's giving back to the community. And I can't emphasize this enough. Even that is not enough. We have to give back the community, because what we use nowadays to build things we build to make the world a better place, we gain from the knowledge someone shared with us. We use Stack Overflow, we use open source code on GitHub, we use articles and videos and blog posts who someone created for us. And now that's the moment where we should think what will happen 5 years later or 10 years later, where the people who wrote it for us probably will switch to another field or just won't write something for us. And we have to make sure this future is kind of in a good shape. We have to give back to the community now, so in 5 years we can use whatever we produce nowadays. And by that we can make sure that the field and the community is getting better and better. And we are really privileged to have such a great community in iOS. And for us, giving back to the community is a great way to make sure it stays the same and even gets better and better, but never gets worse. So we understood that this generally is about teaching, not only teaching iOS. And now we should resolve this nomadic thing. So nowadays, when you think about digital nomads or nomadic approach to something, you kind of imagine someone with a laptop on a sandy beach where the sun is like blinking your screen, you can't develop, but you can post nice pictures on Instagram. That's not the original meaning of the word nomadic. Nomad, initially, is a member of a group of people who move from one place to another constantly. And they have to get with them only the most important things. They can't take like lots of luggage, they can't bring their bags, they travel through the deserts, and they have only the most important things to have with them. And that's what we can use when we teach. There is no need to teach someone all the differences between various algorithms and how to write a red-black tree on a whiteboard the moment they want to learn Swift. It's probably not the right approach. It might work, but it might take way longer time to actually get the benefits. And I offer you to focus today on a nomadic approach to teaching, where whatever we want to achieve, we will get only the most important bits from here and there. In such a way, we don't carry too much stuff once we learn. And to do that, let's look at the intersection of learning and traveling. And learners, if you think about that, are very similar to travelers. Some come to the language, programming language, or to the field to explore it for the first time as a weekend city break. And they won't take that much luggage. They have their backpacks, they jump on the low-cost flight, they come to the city, they explore it, they come back. They might decide to come back again and stay here for a winter, or they want to make a long-term commitment and contribute a lot of time and maybe relocate the city. But that's the same way you would actually learn a language. You might try it out for a weekend for a tiny side project. You might do something else and realize that it's not your thing and you don't want to come back to that language again. Like, I know, I don't want to draw fingers, but C# wasn't a nice attempt. But at the same time, they might want to come back again and again and again, and at some point just completely change the field, completely change the profession. And if someone asks you how to start with being an iOS developer, most likely you will send them a link to Xcode and App Store, and you suggest them a few tutorials for building kind of like Instagram clones or whatever. And you will expect them to just achieve the same level as you did, but maybe just later. It will take some time. And that's different from the way we would travel, because if we travel to a city for a weekend, no one suggests us to learn how people in that country pay taxes and what is the mortgage rate on average, and take with you all your belongings. So let's think what we would do for a weekend trip into Turin. Most likely, if you are very limited on time and you paid a lot for flight tickets, you might not want to see only one or two places and you'll move by taxi. You might want to explore a few things, but the majority of them will be like these top 5 things for travelers to the city. You might want to try truffles because it's truffle season. You might want to do something else, but it will be, again, a limited set of things you will try, very specific to that city. And you might want to learn some greetings in Italian because you probably won't have time to keep up with all the small talks and conversations around. Does it work the same way with Swift? If I want someone to explore Swift over the weekend, what I would suggest them to use as a main way to move around the code, as a way to build their first applications, probably Xcode, most likely playgrounds. Because if someone has a very limited set of time and never tried Xcode before, you don't want them to get lost in all these assets and icons and buttons and settings and setting up and all the developer tools around and downloading the 8 gigabytes application. Playgrounds will be way easier to set up. Playgrounds on iPad will be way easier to use as well. And if you want them to explore, you don't want them to first finish the Swift book by Apple. You want them to learn a few things like for loops, printing. You can build a lot with a very limited set of syntax keywords. You might want them to try a few things from the foundation framework, but you don't want them to delve into the core ML or core graphics for the first weekend. And you might want them to learn some basics of objective-oriented programming, classes, structs, whatever, but most likely not the whole difference between Viper and MVVM. And at that point, living versus just passing by through the city matters a lot. And same matters in learning the new thing, the new language, the new architecture, the new approach. You always decide whether you want to live and contribute a significant amount of time, or just pass by to see if it's your thing. Same applies to longer trips. If we are getting to Turin for a longer time, I might rent a bike to move around instead of a taxi. I might explore cities nearby, go to the Alba region, maybe have a train somewhere else. I might try to bake sfogliatelle on my own, but that might take longer time, right? And that's not something I would do if I'm here for a weekend. And I might learn the bigger amount of words to keep up with the small talk about the nice Turin September, October, November weather, whatever it is in this part of the year. With Swift, again, it's different with comparing to the short trip. You might want to move to Xcode this time, because Xcode is way more powerful and way more helpful. You might want to explore a tiny bit of algorithms of data structures. You might know the difference between sets and linked arrays and so on. You probably don't want yet to build the red-black trees. You might want to try building a simple app like cloning Instagram, because it gives you all the things you want to learn, like working with the APIs, displaying the table and collection views, interacting dynamically with the user requests. And you might learn the protocol-oriented paradigm, because that's most likely what you will stick around for a long time. And if you compare these living versus passing by hypotheses on a weekend trip versus a long trip, you can see that actually quite a few things are different. And depending on that initial goal, whether you want to try something for the first time or you want to try it for the first time but you know that you want to stay here for a while, defines what you want to use for that. And when you think in such a way about anything you want to learn, you won't define it by, well, typing it in Google, how to learn iOS development, and just jumping on the first 10 links and reading all the 20 books you get there. No, you most likely will set the goal and you'll think, do I just want to try it out for a while? Do I want to commit the next half a year of my life? Do I want to be an iOS developer for the next 10 years, whatever comes during that? Do I want to keep up with the Swift UI and all the new frameworks and APIs? And based on that answer, the set of goals you have and set of tools you would use to achieve that is different every time. So now, let's think about a harder example. What if we want to relocate to Turin? And that's my theoretical assumption. I would buy a bike instead of renting it. I would explore other parts of Italy because, well, Italy is huge. I will try long-term rent and I will have to learn about how it actually works, where to look for the apartments, how to rent the apartments, how to pay taxes and like whatever council taxes here and so on. And I might actually have to learn the language because that's the most important thing of relocating to another country. And at that point, if we apply the same to Swift, and we assume that learning Swift as a language is not the initial goal, it's one of the tools. You don't have to learn Swift, you can learn Objective-C. But if your goal is to use Swift to develop iOS apps, you might move to Vim. I'm kidding, don't do that. But you might. You might explore other frameworks, even though they are not really linked to what you're doing right now. CoreML, ARKit. It might be useful in the future, but also it teaches you all the paradigms Apple enforces to us as developers, all the tools and all the approaches on the designing the documentation, designing the APIs they have. And by learning the frameworks they build for us, you can learn more about the way they think and about the way they want us to think. And then you might consider trying to contribute to Apple Swift, because if you move to a city for a long term, you pay taxes, you care about that city, you want to make sure it gets better and better and better. You live here nowadays. Same with the language. Swift is open sourced. And if you want to commit to Swift as a language in the long term, now it's your responsibility as well to make sure it stays as good as possible and gets better and better. And the easiest way to do that is to contribute to Swift as a language. And you might want to learn all the developer tools and instruments around. And same as with the language, once we move to Turin and learn Italian, and then we move to another city in Italy, we still can learn use the language we learned. Same with the developer tools. If you learn LLDB and you know how to use it professionally in Xcode, the next day, once you switch to Python, you can still use LLDB as a debugger tool, and the syntax stays the same. So based on that, based on the goal we have in mind, we have to change the way we achieve that goal. And that's where the building the roadmap comes. So building the roadmap consists of several parts. It's like planning your trip. It's finding the motivation, thinking about what you have to take with you, thinking about all the obstacles which you might face on your way. And motivation is hard. Like for people who don't want to travel, there is no point in learning what to do once you start to travel because they don't want to. And same with learning. Even if someone says that they want to learn, there is a chance that their motivation might be weak or might disappear at some point later. And that's where you have to think about that and make sure that there is a way to keep this reward cycle and make sure that the motivation stays. And motivation always starts with engagement. Engagement matters because once you can engage someone by showing them nice pictures of the city you want to travel or by showing them the apps you can build, they want to be a part of that. You can bring them to conferences, you can show them the apps, you can talk with them, and same with traveling, and same with development. And then comes the improvement, because once you engage, you see that the quality of your interaction gets better and better and better. And then comes independence, because once you teach someone, you don't want them to keep asking you questions they can't find answers to. You want them to become independent and learn how to find the right answers. And then comes inspiration, because once you get better, once you improve yourself, once you see independence from the whatever you rely on, you get inspired. You know that you can do whatever you want. You can travel to the city without a map and still explore it. You can decide to build an app and build it. You inspire yourself, you inspire others, and that motivates you as well. And then comes involvement. Once you go through that cycle and you know how to inspire yourself and others, once you're independent, and you can involve and actually evolve, that means this cycle will be looped. You will go again for the engagement and improvement, and you'll keep learning and keep getting better and keep getting inspired, which will keep you in the loop and make sure you keep learning as well. But once we have the motivation and we have this set of tasks somewhere in our mind, we have to prioritize them. We have to decide what we learn first and what we do first. And there is a concept of Eisenhower Matrix, which helps a lot with prioritizing things. And it works in product management, in your own goal management, and as well with the setting up goals for learning. So the first thing in the Eisenhower Matrix is something not important and not urgent. And if you have that somewhere in your list, you just cross it out. No need to learn that or do that or see that. Then you have urgent, but not important. And in most cases, there might be a way to delegate it. So we want it to be done, but it's not so important we have to do it ourselves. And when you learn something, there is no need straight out of the box learn how everything works, how the layout constraints get handled and resolved somewhere behind the system, how to change the background color in LDB without rebuilding your app. It might be urgent if you need to do something like showing a keyboard in your first app you build, but it's not so important. You have to understand how it works so you can delegate it. You can find an answer on Stack Overflow, and you can use it for now because for the goal you want to achieve, it's urgent but not important. And then comes important but not urgent. And in that case, as it's not urgent but is important, you have to do it, but at some point, and you have to decide when. You might decide to learn that bit once you understand the concepts, once you finish with learning the classes and structs and you know how to combine them in the code. But there is no need yet to learn about protocols, and that's important but not urgent right now. And as you could guess, urgent and important is something you would do right now, and that's where you start. That's where you draft your goals and you prioritize them first. And then comes the important urgent, and the others are either removed or delegated. And that way you can remove all the noise from the tasks you have and focus on the most meaningful things you want to do. And then, if you think about traveling, how would you teach or inspire others to travel? And how people do that nowadays? And they usually just share impressions. They share about their trips, they post pictures, they discuss with friends. And usually they use social media, blogs, they bring souvenirs, magnets in the fridge, all these things. They have and share recommendations. And once someone comes and asks you, like, what can I visit in Turin, you might have something to recommend. And now, that's how we would inspire someone to travel. But can we use the same to inspire someone to teach or learn development? And yes, we would use actually the same things. We would use social media, and iOS community on Twitter is huge. We would use blogs to share the things we learned and share the tricks we learned and ways to make our life easier as developers. And we'll build apps and share the apps and show these apps and discuss them and use them, most importantly, and get feedback. And we would have advice to share as well, because we went through that path, we learned it, and that's the same as the recommendation of what to see in the city. So even in the sense of sharing impressions, development is very similar to traveling. And once we do all of that, we have to estimate success. And that's where it gets tricky. Because estimation of success is a tough problem. You can estimate the number of lines of code you wrote or delete. You can estimate the number of comments you have. But that doesn't mean you're successful. That doesn't mean you feel successful. And for that, there is another loop I want to share. It's a motivation loop. So we already discussed motivation, and once you have it, you bring in performance. You perform something, and if it works, you get the rewards. And that initial loop is very short on building iOS apps, because you can literally drag a button into a storyboard, build this on your phone, and this button will click. And that means you already built something, and it takes like seconds of your time. But once you move to harder and more complex tasks, the motivation to performance step takes longer, because your motivation reduces while your performance doesn't come up yet. But once you get the performance and you understand how to build something, you have confidence, you feel dependent, you get the rewards, essentially. And these rewards are way higher than a reward of making the button press. Because at that point, once you see your app in the App Store and you see that people like it, and you see all these posts around about your app, that brings you a bigger reward, which sparkles a bigger motivation, and the loop closes again. And the success estimation here would be the shortness of the loop. As fast as you can produce performance and move to a reward means you are more and more successful as a developer. If you can inspire yourself in small things, if they bring you reward as well, it means that you are, well, solid. You're stable in the mind feeling of being a developer. You don't expect your app to be perfect. You know that it takes time. It's an iterative process. And that's why it's important to always think about this mental model and think whenever you feel sad or disappointed something doesn't work, think what actually worked and what reward does it bring. Because these are small blocks and we build a bigger thing. And that's an ongoing process. We can't finish something and say, now I am succeeded as an iOS developer. That doesn't happen. Even though we can estimate success though, we have to make sure that there are no obstacles in our way. And removing obstacles is hard as well, because there are different types of obstacles, and sometimes you don't know, is it a problem or not? And the biggest problem is procrastination. And procrastination actually is not a problem. It's not a skill or something like a bad habit. It's a state of mind, and if you feel that you procrastinate, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means for that moment of time, you have to do something else. And there are different techniques to fight with that. You can use the Pomodoro technique, where you dedicate 25 minutes to doing something specific, and then 5 minutes to do whatever you want, and then switch back to 25 minutes. But it's very personal. You have to find the way which works for you, but never gets disappointed because of procrastination. As we've seen in previous slides, it doesn't mean that your performance is bad. It just means that your reward at that moment in time is different. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is even harder because you're just not sure. You are not aware of the ways to solve something. You might not know if you are good enough to do that. You might not know if that will work out. And the only way to check it is actually build something. Build an MVP, build a keynote mockup and show it to your friends. And that's where uncertainty will just go away because you will get some feedback. And then fear to share, fear to actually finish, fear to start, and fear of the starting is the hardest one because it's very hard to start. You might find various excuses like, oh, there are similar apps, it's not needed yet. I don't know that specific thing. I don't want to give a talk because I don't have enough skills. This fear is something you have to fight on your own, and yet you don't have to be afraid of starting or be afraid of sharing because there is no worst case scenario. Nothing wrong will happen if you build an app which no one needs because you will learn a lot. And then the noise. And the noise is even harder to define, but in that specific case, the noise is everything you get and consume in the world around. You might learn and see all these blogs about different frameworks, different technologies, different patterns and architectures, and you might be afraid that you don't know which one to pick. But not knowing whether you should use MVVM or Viper to build a weather app shouldn't stop you from building it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be afraid of the noise or think that whatever you read on the internet or listen to the talks is the only source of truth. It's not. Just give it a try, see how it goes. And now I know what you think. You think, okay, Vadim, you promised us to teach how to teach. And we just learned how we learn. Yes, it's because we learn constantly. Ernest Hemingway at some point said that we are all apprentices in a craft where no one ever becomes a master. And that's true. There might be apprentices who are doing better than us. But the idea is that you can't master that. You can't become the best ever. There is always improvements to be made and new things to learn. And that's why we learn constantly. And that's why, even though we learn, we shouldn't be afraid to teach. Because we would teach in the same way we learn, and now we are only ones who know better what is needed and what is not on that path. We are the best nomads in the room because we learned that and we know what was needed and what wasn't. So we can move it further, we can share it with the other fellow developers and make their life better. And to sum it up, please share the knowledge. You are the best people to do that. If you know how to travel, you know how to learn. And as we've seen on the keynote talk, there are lots of people who travel to this conference. So I'm pretty sure lots of people know how to learn and thus know how to teach. And your journey depends only on the goals you define, whether it's a weekend trip or a complete relocation. It depends on that depends your journey, and on that depends what you would use and what you would want to achieve to get there. And because of that, please set honest goals. If you want to do something because it brings more money, be honest with yourself because it will define the way you get there. There are various ways to build apps, and there are various goals for building apps, or for learning iOS, or for teaching iOS. So when you think about doing something, please think about honest goals and think how it can help you in the future. Yeah, I would like to give you some time for questions. We might be slightly running out of time, probably. And if you do, please find me somewhere outside. Thank you very much.